Hello everyone and welcome to the Backyard Art School. So today I'm back in the studio and I'm setting up everything that we need for when we start our sculpture component with our Term 3 sculpture classes. So already the students have chosen what they would like to sculpt, and we are focusing on animals with our sculpture term. And I found that I was asked a question when I'm working for a preschool as well to help them with their end of year major exhibition. And I had a few inquiries whether I work with construction with paper, or if I work with papier-mâché, and do I only just work in clay? And I've found that I have tried paper, working with children with paper using such as Alexander Calder, you know how he does the lovely mobiles out of paper. I have done a workshop with that. I have also created papier-mâché animals, but mostly focusing on thinner sort of insect-like creatures which have thin legs. Then I'll go towards using papier-mâché. But the reason why I love using paper clay is that it really lends itself to a lot of what you are drawing for your design. Will then be able to be translated with your sculpture at the end. Because I do find that if you're using papier-mâché, you can be quite limited with the textures that you can achieve with the surface. So once you're applying the paper around the armature of the sculpture of the insect and so forth, you can't actually get into the surface for the last part to get those lovely fine details that you can with clay, and that's why I really love using clay. And as far as creating a sculptures which are more construction, using shapes and so forth, there is a place there for it, but I do find that there's a lot of paper cutting, sticking and building and construct, which can happen, but then you're sort of not able to manage the size or scale, and also you're limited with what paper you are able to access. And I personally, I'm a big one for recycling. Any of the materials that come through with the packaging, I will always try and recycle to use in my classes. And that's why I do find that with, you know, like my son had a paper assignment to work with paper, with recyclable products. And it actually took a while to actually collect, you know, egg cartons and all those sort of things. And that's sort of something I don't really want to have in the studio, because you end up being an artist, and I have worked when I was working as a professional artist. When you are an artist that's a construction artist, where you find all different elements and put them together to create a beautiful sculpture, you do actually have to have quite a lot of space to be able to store all those little bits of recycled cardboard, paper, wood, and you'll find that you'll become a bit of a hoarder. So for me, to run a really efficient studio, also to be really mindful of the space that I'm working in, and to understand that I'm going to be changing over to painting again and then drawing classes, and also school holiday workshops, I need to have a medium that can work where I can have it set up for the term. I also use, as I said, recycled products. So what I mean by that is any of the canvas boxes that I have brought in when I'm ordering all my canvases in. These boxes, they're about 4 times the size of this. I cut up into 4 pieces, and they create fantastic boxes for when I do have my sculpture classes. I then store all of the sculptures underneath the table. I have about up to 40 students each term. And also what I use, and I'll just show you another tip, which is fantastic, from all the drawing components that we have done. I'm just getting the paper. You know, the paper backing, you got this lovely hard cardboard backing with any papers that you may be using in the class for drawing. I use that lovely hard backing for the base of the sculptures. So meaning I will cut them up into A5 size. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4. You get 4 from each pad. And I cut up the backing. I always keep these really, really useful. And then once you've cut them up, then you just grab a little bit of aluminium foil to waterproof the surface and masking tape, and then just get the students to write their names on the back. And then this will fit really lovely at the end of the day into a box, and then you can store it. So you've also got to be really mindful of how are you going to store your sculpture after you're creating it or during the duration of the creation. And so yeah, there needs to be systems in place that work, and also utilizing any paper or boxing or packaging that I have sent to me with the other materials that I'll order in, and recycling those materials. It's really good. Even the bags that I have, which is wrapped around the clay, for when I get the clay in, I will reuse those bags for covering the sculptures whilst they're being worked on. So there's no waste in our studio. Everything is always recycled. We don't just unpack all the canvases and throw the boxes away. We use everything for other purposes throughout the year of when we're teaching. So it's a really much more better environmentally, because you're not always throwing out the rubbish, but you're actually reusing it and recycling it. And these boxes will be then taken home when they've got their sculptures in them. They can then take their sculptures home in the box, which is really handy without being damaged. So now we're going to go into this week. So the last couple of weeks we've been focusing on the drawing aspect, and I did post a video, I think 2 weeks ago, just showing the very basic developments of drawing a cat for a sculpture, and also creating that cat sculpture into a design. And this is I think that sculpture is really one of the most important terms for me to teach, to help students really understand how to draw. It really helps them understand 3-dimension and also object drawing, because they not only are drawing something 2-dimensionally, they then have to build it 3-dimensionally. So you're really working different parts of the brain in 3D, also looking at all sides of an animal and having to consider that, not just one side. So I think that as far as the drawing aspect, I'll show you an example, but when you're drawing and sketching an animal, the process of drawing and sketching is very similar to when you're actually sculpting it as well, where you start off with the basic shapes. You start off the basic shapes with the clay, and then you also start off with then refining those shapes, and you do the same thing where you refine those shapes when you start to work on the clay. And then at the very end, and the beauty of clay, which you don't get with papier-mâché or anything else, is that you can actually then finish off with all of the surface textures that you'd like to achieve, depending if the animal could be an elephant, or it could be a woolly mammoth, which we've had students who've been asking to do that, which I can adapt to. So for instance, my Monday class, they are younger students, they're 6 to 8 years old, and they were really wanting, we had half the students who really wanted to go into the dinosaur sort of animals rather than actual animals, and then there was another half which wanted to do an elephant. And so to have to be able to work with both of those needs that the students were wanting, I can just adapt the woolly mammoth to having the elephant basic shape, and then the surface of it will just be adding more hair, larger tusks, and so forth. But also what I really like about clay as well, I've been working in lots of different mediums, and every medium that you work in, there are limitations. So the beauty of working, for instance, in papier-mâché is that you can get quite elaborate with the shapes, such as if you're wanting to do a dragon, you could do a beautiful wings on the dragon, and very thin, but you can't do that with clay. So there are limitations, because it's, you could do wings with the dragon, but they would have to be folded in. And I do actually have a student who is going to be, a couple of students doing dragons as well this term. And with the older students, I usually they can do whatever they like to sculpt. They can choose. And they always have plenty of reference photos. So for instance, I've got a couple of students doing axolotl. So these sort of reference photos are fantastic to draw from. And then they'll start to be building the three-dimensional sculpture, which is to size, to scale of their drawing, which is really a fantastic way for them to problem solve, to look at issues of how are they going to do the really thin legs of the axolotl sitting on the mat without it snapping off. So I may feed them suggestions in, well, how about you have something underneath the axolotl, such as rocks or some sort of moss or grass or something underneath, and draw that into your design. And then you don't have the issue of it just being these fragile fingers on the mat itself. So you've got something else to support the sculptural body of the animal that you're doing. And that's the same with even the elephants. I've actually got an elephant here, and one of another really fantastic props to use when you're doing sculpture is these fantastic, I get these at Hobbyco, little animals, and I've got a whole box of them that I've been collecting. I'm actually going to Hobbyco this weekend. It's my son's birthday, and I always, when I go to this shop, I love it because they always have these cool little animals, dinosaurs, they've got rams, they've got all sorts of animals, and they're really quite accurate with the size and the way that they look. So students have the opportunity of looking at something, an object that's three-dimensional, and then also that activity of drawing the animal before sculpting it is a really great lesson. And one of the things I do notice that a lot of students start off doing when they do drawing is they'll start to focus on what they think is what they're good at with drawing. So they might start off with starting with the face of the animal rather than the body. And it's just interesting to see those sort of things where, as a teacher, I'll try and encourage them to really look at the basic shapes first before they start looking at the details of their animal. And this is something really hard for sometimes students to understand, but once they do, it puts them in a totally different realm of their drawing skills, being able to not get frustrated because they focus so much on this face, and then when they build the body of the animal, it didn't fit on the page, or what wasn't really working with the composition of their artwork. So just to give you an example of that, I was doing some demonstrations, and when I do teach classes, I always demonstrate to the students how to sketch animals, and if they have similar animals such as an elephant and then a woolly mammoth, it'll be just slight adjustments at the very end when you do the decorations or the surface texture and so forth. So for an example, we've got this beautiful elephant, and if you're going to be drawing to scale with your mat, and I've actually got this as a demonstration, a couple of videos with the cat, but I'll show you what a side view quickly of that. So you've got the side of your mat, so that's the size that you're going to be working by with your design for the elephant. And the first thing I always get the students is just to draw a line, and that will be the size that you're going to be building within. That's going to be the scale that you're going to be having to work towards with creating your sculpture, so that it can be able to fit in the box, and then at the end of the term you can take it home. And obviously if you want to go bigger and so forth. So we draw our sculptures to scale, and usually what I go through the process is, the first thing that you'll sketch through is the basic shape. I would suggest for the stomach or the body of the animal always. Okay, and then by doing that you're also working in where the size of the head is, the position of it. So this is an elephant. I'm just going to show you an example of how I teach. Then you've got the legs, and I usually just do lines for the legs. So where are they going to be positioned? Don't do any details. You just want to work out the basic shapes. Where are they positioned with the actual scale and size of this mat? And that's the first thing that you'll go into, is just doing the basic shapes of everything. And obviously there'll be a tail which just comes down from the spine, so everything fits on. You've got the basic shapes. I hope you can see that. And I'll go a little bit darker. Then you're going on to refining. So when it comes to you working in sculpture, we'll talk about what happens to your trunk. Like, you can't really have with clay a trunk that's just coming out of the body like this. You could maybe if it was in papier-mâché, but then you wouldn't be able to get all the textures of the wrinkles of the elephant if you're using the papier-mâché. So to problem solve this element of the tusk, or sorry, the trunk of the elephant, is that you'll need to have it sort of folding on back to his head a little bit. So folding back. And when it's folding back to the head, you've got less of a chance of that breaking off. So that would be like one of the problem-solving elements. Another thing is underneath the legs and the belly, you won't be able to have just these legs holding up the elephant with clay. There's just no way. You'll need to have some sort of support underneath. So when we're doing a sculpture that is this size to this scale, I always encourage to use an armature inside, which is like a paper core that we first create to build in a little foundation for the clay to then be sculpted on. And so with that, the students will then go about drawing in the thickness of the legs. After doing the basic shapes of everything, they like the size of it. They then start to shape and refine the feet, both on the back side and the front area, but then they'll also be drawing the grass. Then with this sculpture, you look at the finer details, such as we observe how the neck is attached to the body of the elephant and how quite round it is. The basic shape of the elephant is coming down and then up towards the front of the legs. And then you've also got the positioning of the legs and how it will be walking, and they've got these lovely cushiony feet. Apparently this is the only place that the elephant will sweat from. I Google searched that, and that's quite an interesting fact, is that that's where they sweat from and cool down, by standing in water. And then we've also got the details such as the little toes, the nails and so forth. And then we'll pop in the other leg, and then we go into drawing in. So you've got the body, you've got the legs in, and then once you've got all that, then you rub out any of those working outlines that you don't need. And so this is a really, sort of basic sketch just to get the positioning of everything. Another thing I also talk to the students is that the legs aren't just sort of hooked in underneath the belly. It actually comes a part of the shoulder. So you actually have to have a continued sort of line that comes up for that. And also the foot behind, maybe just bending down. So you start to refine everything as you go. And then if you're wanting to create perhaps some reeds, so you may draw in some of the reeds as well underneath the tummy, which will disguise the paper core that you'll need to have when building a sculpture this large. And the reason why you're needing a paper core is that when you're working with paper clay, it is a combination of paper. You've also got the clay, like dirt particles or elements, and then you've also got water. So when that's full of water, it is larger. It does actually shrink when you start to dry. And if you imagine you had a ball of clay and the core of it is really wet, it'll be larger. But if the surface area is drying out, what's going to happen is it's going to crack because you've got a larger element inside of the wet clay inside. So this issue can be solved by just having a paper core inside. So I do get the students just to draw a little sort of scale, to scale, how large they're going to have to draw their paper core or create their paper core for the elephant or the animal that they're creating. So just draw that in. Leaving about 2 centimeters of clay on the outside edge, and then when they come to the head, should be fine if it's coming off through the body. But then again, we have that issue with tusks, could be an issue of coming off, so they really need to think about how thick those tusks are going to be if they're going to be putting them on, and how large they're going to be. The mouth of this elephant's open, so I'm just drawing that. You've got the eyes, you've got these lovely big flappy ears. So looking at the shapes of all of that, drawing it in, you got your lovely eye, so forth, and then you got your beautiful tusk trunk, and it will curl onto each other. And when we sculpt it, you'll also will see the limitations of the positioning of the trunk, and that can be played with. The beauty of sculpting in clay as well, instead of papier-mâché or with any other mediums is that you can always take away and then also add on. So that's the lovely aspect of working clay, is that it is a medium where you can either take away a form or a feature, but then you can easily then stick it back on. And that's why it's really, there's ways of, such as drawing, where you're rubbing out or you're changing things around. You can do that with clay as well, and I really love that freedom, and for students to be able to explore that. So that is an example of little tips of how to do package, or how to store, what to think about when running a workshop for students, which is sculptural. You do have limitations with the size and scale that you can create, and you also want to have a sculpture that is going to be able to take it home. You can put it on your shelf and be something to be proud of. So, you know, if you're bringing out this large sort of massive sculpture that has been constructed with paper, where are you going to put it when you take it home? So these are all things that you need to think about when doing three-dimensional works. And yeah, usually I like to sort of work relatively small with the younger students. It is actually better to go to the scale and size of their hands, not too small. But what you do find is that when they're working with the shape and the form, the final aspect of it is the texture. So that's when I actually start to use the clay tools. And I've got different tools just to be able to get the lovely different textures. I use like skewers, which is really easy for any details for the eyes, wrinkles, toenails, anything like that that you need. So yeah, that's a little bit of a little view of how and why I work in paper clay. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me this week. I look forward to seeing you next week. We will be getting into the starting points of creating the sculptural design. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.